Hello and welcome back. It's wonderful to be with you here again today. And the last time that we were together, we talked about Buddha's life and how we can apply the teachings of his own life to our life. And what I'm really interested in exploring here is the idea, or the question, actually not the idea, but the question of who am I? Self-knowledge is critical, and it's this has been our entry point, is looking at Buddha's life. So if you missed the last discussion that we had on this, go ahead and you can watch the replay on my page, Lisa Witter Facebook page. Go on over there and check it out. You can also check it out on my YouTube channel, which is just Lisa Ingalls over at YouTube. So you can find the replays in either one of those two places. And if you're liking this content and enjoying the discussion and getting something out of it for yourself, I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and also to like or follow me on Facebook. Again, it's Lisa Ingalls Witter. So let's dive in for today, and we're going to talk about the Four Noble Truths. We're actually going to speak into the first two noble truths of Buddha, and this is really what his life was about. And we've been working with this book by Ken MacLeod, and just show you here, Wake Up to Your Life. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm sort of following, we're studying a bit from this book, and there'll be some other books as well. And I do want to mention, although I'm speaking, we're looking specifically at Buddhist teachings here right now. I'll also be bringing in some other Eastern philosophy, and as well as esoteric mysticism and some Kabbalah, because all of these teachings have, there's a common thread, as most of us know. There's a common thread in all these teachings. They have these slightly different perspectives on the same thing that we can really dig into, and sometimes a different type of teaching hits us more than another. So I like to go back and forth. But for right now, we're looking again at Buddha's life and his teachings and the Four Noble Truths, and from this book, Wake Up to Your Life by Ken MacLeod. So ultimately, it's my belief that suffering obviously is something that exists in the world. Buddha said it exists in the world. We can't get around suffering, but it is my belief that suffering, at some point or another, we get to the point where suffering ultimately leads us back to God. And God, however you think of God, it takes us back to, we get to a point in our own personal suffering at which we can't do it ourselves. We know that we need something, we need to turn to something that is a source of strength and power greater than we ourselves are. And so ultimately, I think that suffering leads us back to that place. And again, right now, what we're looking at in terms of suffering is that suffering is this condition that keeps us from knowing our true self, knowing who we really are, being able to answer the question, who am I? With suffering, which is just conditioning, we're clouded, we can't see, we're veiled. And that truth, the mystery of being, the truth of who we really are, is hard to find. It's basically impossible to find unless we can work through the teachings of suffering. So here we go into the first two pieces, the first two parts of Noble Truth, of the Four Noble Truths that Buddha taught. So from this book, again, Wake Up to Your Life, he says, in his first teaching, Buddha formulated his understanding as the Four Noble Truths: suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to cessation. So we'll be talking about those first two pieces today. So they're based on a simple problem-solving model, a model that dates far back in Indian philosophy and medicine. So it's one thing that I want to point out is that none of this is just not asking you to believe any of this. We talked a bit about gnosis in our last time together, and how important gnosis is. That gnosis means self-knowledge. We understand through our own felt experience. So what Indian philosophy did is they had a system for that. So the system, this model that was used, was 4 parts. And the questions that were asked are: 1, what is the problem? So the problem that we're looking at here is the problem of suffering. Number 2, what is the root of the problem? So we'll be looking at that today. What is the root of the problem? What is the cause of suffering? And then, is there a solution to the problem? And then finally, how do you put that solution into effect? How do you enact that solution in your daily life? All right. And again, once we know this formula and we start to practice it, we have this daily practice in our life, we can begin to unmask, unveil, and the truth of who we really are, and the true nature of reality, the mystery of being, begins to reveal itself to us, which is a very, very exciting process. So what he says here about suffering, the first noble truth is the truth of suffering. There is suffering. We can't deny that, right? Suffering is the central problem of human existence. So Buddha did not ignore suffering or try to explain it away as an unfortunate side effect of a divine plan or cosmic order. Suffering was, for Buddha, the central issue. So suffering, as it is used in the first noble truth, refers to any sense of discomfort. We experience discomfort, whether it's, the uneasiness of embarrassment, or we have a broken leg. We experience some form of suffering. When discomfort arises, our first impulse is to put an end to it. Think about that for a moment and reflect on that statement in your own life. Is that true? When discomfort arises, our first impulse, that doesn't mean that it's what happens after, but the very first impulse that we usually have is to put an end to it, to stop the discomfort in any way that we can. So we are, in effect, trying to separate from what we are experiencing. And by doing so, we separate from life and from the mystery of being. The First Noble Truth is basically an injunction not to ignore or dismiss what we experience. So it's an injunction, it's an invitation to lean in to our experience. Remember the last time that we talked, our first impulse is to try to manipulate, to control our experiences, to keep it so that we don't feel suffering. So suffering arises in three ways. It arises from the pain of physical or emotional pain. Maybe you are suffering from migraine headaches or severe back pain, right? Or, so that would be physical pain, that type of suffering. Generally, what most Westerners want to do is take some type of pill or alleviate it by taking some type of medicine. And then there's emotional pain, of course. We can experience all types of emotional pain. But suffering also comes from change, the suffering of change. When change takes place in our lives, internal and external structures are dismantled, either by choice or by force of circumstances. Perhaps a relationship comes to an end, or your child goes off to college and you're in empty nest syndrome now. Maybe you take on a new job or quit your job, change of careers. All of these changes cause discomfort, right? Whether you intended them or didn't intend them. So even when a change is welcomed, it does create some discomfort in our lives because our structures are changed. And then finally, the third kind of suffering is the suffering of existence itself. So we believe, he says, we believe that we exist, but we ask, who am I? Who am I? We find no answer beyond the roles and functions of that we fill in life, right? I'm a mother, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a therapist, I'm a father, I'm a sister, a brother, right? What is the answer beyond those roles that we play in life? And many of us have done a lot of work around it, and still we come up against that question, who am I? So even when everything is going well, he says, in our lives, we're happy and fulfilled with our family and our work, a small doubt or fear lingers. And is this who I am? And is there anything else to life? Right? So the First Noble Truth says that there is suffering and that suffering is pervasive. And it invites us not to ignore and pervade it, but to look at it, to know what it is, and to understand how it arises. And that takes courage. It takes courage to lean into it. It also takes a warrior type of spirit. So it's not easy. Just like we said in our last session together, waking up is hard to do. It's not an easy thing. Again, it takes courage. It takes the spirit of a warrior in order to do it. So one of the things we can begin to examine for ourselves around this First Noble Truth is to examine suffering in our own lives, and to consider, of those three, there's the physical and mental suffering, the suffering caused by change, and the suffering of existence. Of those three, which one is most prominent in your life? Just examine, take a moment to think about that. Just reflect back. This is the beginning of self-knowledge. We have to inquire, we have to look at these. And as we go through our day, begin to notice, oh, this is physical suffering that I'm experiencing. Oh, This is the suffering of change. I don't want to change, or I chose this type of change, but it feels really uncomfortable, right? Where does suffering show up for you in your life? And look at that. So now we go on to the second noble truth, which is the origin of suffering, because Buddha had a whole, obviously, 4 noble truths. And so the second part of it is, well, okay, what's the problem? And then what is the second part? The second question we have to answer is, what is the root of the problem? What is the origin of the problem? So Buddha's second insight involves the origin of suffering. And what Buddha said is that suffering comes from emotional reactivity. So all experiences, he said, are either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every experience you have in life, you can categorize into one of those 3 things, according to Buddha: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Think about this for yourself. Any experience that you've had in the last 24 hours, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. For instance, my husband and I are landlords of property in Oakland, and we got a call late last night that one of our tenants was mugged very close, within a block of our house, and they stole, obviously took her purse, stole her keys, her phone, everything. That was an unpleasant experience for us, at least I'll speak for myself, to get that text message and phone call from our tenant that she had been mugged, right? All experiences, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then the 3 fundamental emotional reactions that we have to those experiences are either attraction, aversion, or indifference, right? So if the nature of your experience is pleasant, then your emotional reaction is going to be attraction. If the nature of your experience is unpleasant, then your reaction, your first impulse, is going to be aversion. If the nature of your experience is neutral, then your reaction is going to be indifference. And what the Buddha said was that these 3 reactions are called the 3 poisons because they poison our experience of life. So the example he gives, he says, is suppose that you're having a good time at a party and you wish you could always feel this way. Your desire to hold on to the good feeling subverts your enjoyment. Attraction has poisoned your experience of the party. So my example of that would be this. I feel like this happens every so often with my husband and I. Will be on a bike ride, or we'll be out on a hike, or we'll be out doing something really fun and just having an amazing time together. And one or the other of us will say, and we always catch each other like, oh my God, I wish that we were hiking more often. And it's like, but we're hiking right now in this beautiful environment. Like, when I say that, I've just subverted my entire experience of the hike that we're already on. Like, I'm already feeling bad because we don't do this all the time, instead of enjoying being present and aware to the beauty that's around me right now. My mind is like, oh my God, we don't do this enough. How often do we do that in life? Can you think of examples like that for yourself, where your experience, you're somewhere else, right? And so what's happening right here, right now, is poisoned by either your attraction, your desire for more of it, or your aversion, like I don't want any of this, or just feeling indifferent and neutral to it. So he says, if we examine the experience of suffering, we will see that it has two components to it: pain and emotional reaction to pain. Pain is simply what happens. Pain is our experience. Pain is either, it's either the physical or the emotional pain. It's the pain of change. It's the pain of the existential crisis that we're having of ourselves, right? So it's either, he says, if we examine the experience of pain, we'll see that it has two components, either pain or pain and emotional reaction to pain. And pain is simply what happens. It's the experience. If we drop a hammer on our foot, it hurts, right? Suffering is an emotional reaction to that pain. We yell at the hammer, we berate our spouse for leaving it precariously balanced on the shelf, or we fume at ourselves for being careless. This is a very good distinction to be made here. And we'll just sort of, to end off here, the final piece here, reactions are patterns of emotions and behaviors formed by conditioning that runs automatically when they're triggered by internal or external events. I'm going to say that one more time because it's really important. Remember that our reactions are either, a reaction can be either attraction, aversion, or indifference, neutral. So reactions are simply patterns of emotions and behaviors formed by conditioning that run automatically when they are triggered by internal or external events. Reactions are the cumulative result of a complex interaction among emotions, behaviors, and perception. Significant sources of our conditioning, of course, come from our culture, our experiences growing up, from our caretakers and growing up in our family. It comes from also our core needs, are the needs of our body, our basic human needs for love and affection and other forms of attention, family history, our values, our childhood and adult experiences, our social and our cultural experiences. All of that creates the conditioning that we live by that affects the way we react to an experience. So the last piece, he says, is that we can think of reactive patterns as mechanisms. They're pre-established conditioning and are triggered by external and internal events. And once they are triggered, they run only according to what has been conditioned. We can think of them like computer programs, right? So the second noble truth tells us that the origin of suffering is emotional reactivity. So I'm going to pause there until we meet again next time, and hopefully that gives you a little bit to think about. To end off here, I just want to say that all of this discussion isn't about believing anything that I'm telling you, because when something is true, you can actually prove it. You have gnosis of it. You have a felt experience of it. And that's all we're trying to do here, is to have self-knowledge and to have that through gnosis, to understand ourselves through felt experience. So everything that we've discussed here today, I invite you to prove it to yourself, to test these concepts in your own life. Go back and look at where pain is showing up in your life and suffering is showing up in your life. Look at where you're reactive. Maybe re-listen to the discussion and see, where is this true? How can I prove it or test it in my own life so that I have gnosis, so that I know that it's true for me? And when we meet again next time, we'll go over the last two of the noble truths, and then we'll start to have some discussion here. a little bit more discussion, opening up really into this journey of knowing who we truly are, getting to the core of that question, who am I? Waking up to the mystery of being. So again, if you haven't already followed me over on Facebook, on my page on Facebook, I invite you to do that there, Lisa Ingalls Witter, or over on YouTube, you can subscribe to my channel, Lisa Ingalls, and these discussions will be happening on a regular basis. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful, beautiful day, and namaste.